Have you ever found yourself in the season of life where you're just waiting? Waiting for an answered prayer, waiting for a breakthrough, maybe just waiting for a single sign that things are actually going to get better. It's this deeply painful, yet incredibly universal feeling, isn't it? Waiting on a prayer that feels like it's just echoing into the void. So, have you ever wondered why God sometimes seems totally silent? You pray, but the answer just doesn't come. You trust, but honestly, your situation just gets harder. It is downright exhausting to keep waiting and trusting when you can't see any visible change. You might be looking around right now asking, where are you? And look, if that's you, you're definitely not alone in feeling that way.
But here is the core idea we're unpacking in today's explainer. Silence is not abandonment. Some of the absolute greatest historical figures in the Bible face this exact crushing silence. And what they discovered, and what we're really going to dig into today, is that God is actively working, even when he is completely unseen. Your story isn't over just because the author is quietly writing the next chapter.
So, how do we actually endure those quiet periods? Well, that brings us to our first point: faith during the wait.
Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 really nails this concept. It says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." You see, true faith isn't about seeing the miracle first and then believing later. It's about choosing hope way before the miracle ever shows up. It's literally walking forward while the path ahead is still completely hidden in the dark.
Take the story of Abraham, for example. Human perception tells one side of the story, right? He's aging, he's probably feeling forgotten, and he's facing this biologically impossible promise of having a son. But the spiritual reality, it's entirely different. God wasn't forgetting him at all. He was in this intense stage of preparation, building a foundational faith that would literally be remembered for generations, and it was all operating on perfect timing.
Romans 4, verse 20 captures Abraham's response so beautifully. It says, "He staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith, giving glory to God." Abraham waited for years. But you know what? We so often mistake preparation for absence. Just because there's a delay in your life, that doesn't mean the promise has been denied.
But what happens when life doesn't just delay a dream, but seems to completely destroy it? Well, let's look at our next section: purpose in the pit.
Joseph's timeline is honestly just staggering when you look at it. At age 17, he's given this profound dream of greatness. Fast forward just days later, his own brothers betray him and throw him into a literal pit. Then, years drag on. He's sold into slavery. He's locked away in a dark prison. Can you imagine the profound despair he must have felt? Thinking, God, this is definitely not what you promised. And yet, he refused to let bitterness win. And then, out of nowhere, on one ordinary morning, he's abruptly pulled from prison and made Prime Minister of Egypt. Just like that.
And when Joseph eventually stood face to face with the very brothers who betrayed him, he didn't try to get even. Instead, he said this, and we find it in Genesis 50, verse 20. "But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good." That right there, that is the ultimate picture of the unseen hand. What other people intended for complete destruction, God completely transformed into an incredible purpose, raising Joseph up so he could literally save the very people who threw him away.
So we've looked at seasons of waiting and seasons of betrayal. Now our explainer takes a bit of a heavier turn as we explore sudden, truly inexplicable devastation. This brings us to trusting through the pain.
The raw reality of what Job went through is just unimaginable. Without any warning whatsoever, he loses everything: his possessions, his servants, and tragically his children. And on top of all that, he's covered in agonizing sores from head to toe. Everything he held dear was entirely wiped out. Honestly, most people would have just completely abandoned their faith right then and there. Yet, through all of this heartbreak, he still chose to honor the Lord.
How in the world did he do that? Through all that profound grief, Job declared, "The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And look, Job didn't say this because he suddenly had everything figured out or understood the grand design. Not at all. He wrestled deeply with his sorrow, and he asked some truly agonizing questions. But he said this because he made a choice to trust God right in the middle of his pain. He didn't pretend the pain wasn't there. He just chose faith right in the very center of it.
Job's story teaches us so much about trusting during profound suffering. But what about when you're holding on to a massive, life-changing promise, but you're constantly being hunted and misunderstood? Let's turn our attention to David and waiting for God's timing.
Talk about a massive gap between the promise and the reality. David was a young shepherd boy, officially anointed by God to be the king of Israel. But the reality of his day-to-day life? He spent years literally running for his life from a jealous King Saul, sleeping in cold, dirty caves, and living as a fugitive. You can practically hear the confusion, right? If I'm supposed to be king, why on earth am I hiding in a cave? But here's the thing. During those hidden, fugitive years, God was actively shaping David's heart. He was teaching him the humility and the true dependence that's required to be a great leader.
And David eventually came to this incredibly profound realization. He wrote, "Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart." Now, David actually had multiple chances to take revenge on Saul and just seize the throne himself, but he absolutely refused. He wouldn't force it. He decided to let the unseen hand open the door to the throne at the exact perfect time.
So we've seen faith in waiting, in suffering, and in timing. But sometimes, faith requires stepping out bravely into the face of absolute terror and impossible odds. Let's move to our final historical figure today, exploring courage for the moment.
The tension in Esther's story is almost cinematic, and it unfolds so quickly. First, there's this terrifying decree that threatens to wipe out her entire people. Then, she's faced with an impossible choice: stay silent or risk her own life to approach the king uninvited. And remember, back then, doing that could literally mean execution. So what does she do? She calls her people to fast and seek guidance, and then she puts her life on the line, stepping forward with absolute courage. She couldn't control how the king would react, but she absolutely could control her obedience.
So, what actually pushed her to make that impossible choice? Well, her cousin Mordecai sent her a message, reminding her that perhaps she was placed in that royal palace for such a time as this. Just think about that realization for a second. God places us exactly where we are for a purpose we often cannot even see yet. Esther chose obedience over her very real fear, and it ultimately led to this incredible victory and deliverance for her people.
All right, bringing this all back to you. We've been looking at these incredible historical accounts of trusting his unseen hand. Now, I want to draw all these threads together and directly address whatever struggle, pain, or waiting period you might be in the middle of right now with this new perspective.
Looking back at this journey of faith we've been on, Job trusted through unimaginable suffering. David waited for perfect timing instead of rushing ahead and forcing things to happen. Esther walked forward with immense courage when it mattered the most. The common denominator here? Every single one of them trusted God more than their immediate circumstances. The central takeaway for us is that God never wastes a season of waiting, pain, or testing. The unseen hand is quite literally always at work.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question to reflect on as we close out this explainer. Am I willing to trust God when I don't have all the answers? When the path is hidden, when the wait feels incredibly long, and when the outcome is completely uncertain, will you trust the unseen hand? Keep moving forward, my friends, because your story isn't over yet.